Hello, you're listening to the OffCourt Podcast. This is the inaugural episode of our podcast, which covers the history, esoteric stories, and political economy of sports. I'm Abdul, one of your co-hosts.
And I am Eytan, one of your other co-hosts, one of two co-hosts.
Yes, a Muslim and a Jew talk about sports.
Yes, we're the Chromeo of sports commentary.
Yeah. We're the DJ Khalid and Khalid. I don't know if Khalid is actually Jewish.
No, I don't think so. But it's a good one.
This is our first episode, and with this episode, I'm going to open with a question for you. What do you think about when you think about dunks?
I mean, when I think about dunks, it's almost a new way to emasculate somebody in public that's totally accepted, especially with the way it's gone with the internet and YouTube and posting. It's a way to just really embarrass somebody in a totally legal way, take away their livelihood. It's kind of the most savage moves that you can do in sports, which is kind of makes it one of the most awesome ones as well.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm looking at my notes, and I regret not including Dude Perfect compilations into my fucking notes. Tightly
it's owning
rehearsed.
somebody. It's legally owning somebody on national television.
Yeah, it's literally putting your balls in someone's face as you throw a ball over their head.
Yeah, it's doing the crouch thing in a first person shooter, but in real life.
Yeah, whenever I think about dunking, I think about the dunk of death.
Carter inside.
Which, for those who don't know, is during the Olympic Games. I forget what year, but Vince Carter did something called the dunk of death, where he dunked over I think he was 7'2" Frederick Weiss.
Jesus Christ.
And he literally dunked over this guy's head, balls in the face, slammed the ball through the net. And that is the only notable thing on Frederick Weiss's Wikipedia page, is that he got dunked on by Vince Carter and then played for the Knicks.
Rick Weiss, who happened to be a draft pick of the Knicks.
He was drafted by the Knicks. They told him not to come back.
Really?
Did not play in the NBA.
Because of that?
You heard it here first.
Because of that?
Because of that.
It's what a miserable career.
That speaks to the nature of dunking, is that, I mean, you've seen this when people post a dunk. Usually they'll word it as in the opposing player's life has ended. Here is a video of DeMar DeRozan ending Anthony Tolliver's life. So usually it becomes almost like a death note on somebody's Wikipedia page. It's a terrible event that happened to you that they have to include in your history because it's notable.
And when you think about dunking, dunking is unique in as much as it's maybe one of the most political acts in a sport. It is both a statement and an incredibly aggressive assertion of self. There's a couple of things that are these are political moments, right? Muhammad Ali throwing his medals into the river or whatever, or Surya Banali doing a backflip in the Olympic Games as a fuck you to the judges in figure skating. But dunking as an action is specifically unique because it's incredibly political. It's got a really fucking interesting history. And a good place to start with this is in Kareem. I have two sort of quotes to sort of preface this, right? There's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on The Shoulders of Giants has this quote where he says, when basketball is played the way it's supposed to be played, it happens in the air, flying, floating, elevated above the floor, levitating. And then he goes on to describe it as the way oppressed peoples of this earth imagine themselves in their dreams, which is the most Kareem Abdul-Jabbar quote I think you could
and
ever
I can imagine it in his sexy Gil Scott-Heron sounding voice right now as you read it.
It's he's got a beautiful fucking voice. And I think something to mention about both this podcast and especially when talking about dunking is on one hand there's the social politics of it and the identitarian politics of assertion, but there is a very hard economic backbone to dunking, which I'm very excited to get into because I personally hate the term black bodies. I think it's weirdly condescending.
It's also a weird thing to be the opposite of, a fan of using the term black body. I personally prefer to distinguish bodies by their skin color. But
yes. I prefer to like erase human beings in favor of just talking about their fucking physicality. The black bodies that walked on the Selma Bridge, fuck their names.
As much as we're joking, I mean, you're the one who is conducting the research for this specific episode. We're going to be getting into that as a context for the banning of the dunk eventually, I assume, right?
Oh, 100%. But I think it's important to recognize there is like an economic push and pull with dunking that relates to like historic racism and white supremacy. That is like, you know, there's a way to take a class-involved analysis of, like, racial politics, especially when it comes to sports, because sports is, like, maybe the biggest, openly capitalist enterprise on the planet.
Yes.
But, yeah, like, sociologist Michael Eric Dyson describes the dunk as edifying deception, the ability to flout widely understood boundaries through mesmerization, a subversion of common perceptions of the culturally or physically impossible through the creative and deceptive manipulation of appearance. Basically, like, you know, for people like me who are dumb and had to read this like 10 times, he's basically saying doing superhuman things.
Right.
So let's get into the history of the dunk. Pretty much existed as soon as there was a 7-foot person in basketball. Like, as soon as someone was tall enough to get the ball through the hoop, it pretty much existed.
Right. As soon as they stopped only allowing, like, the postmen and the milkmen be basketball players, they allowed people who are built for the way the courts were designed to participate. I assume that's what happened.
Or college kids who would do like hate crimes in their spare time in the 1920s.
Right. Like, well, they had to do it for their initiation for their frats back then. You know, you can't blame them personally.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know that basketball used to be played in a cage?
I did not, actually. I really did not.
So basketball early on, professional basketball would be the court was hemmed in by a cage, and they were called cagers. That was like the term for basketball players.
Wait, you're telling me basketball was cooler at one point back in the day?
Oh, 100%. You're about to hear why. But like, yeah, and before the out of bounds play was because, so, you know, when the ball goes out of bounds, the person who last touched the ball loses possession of the ball, and the other team gets the ball and throws it in. But back then, it was whatever team could get to the ball first could throw it in. So it was not only was it played in a cage, but there were fights over the ball whenever it went out of bounds. Like, it was considered a martial sport more than a skill sport at one point.
Right. They used to play rollerball back in the day.
Yeah.
That's what you're telling me.